Coming up in tonight's prime time, as part of our continuing coverage in the upcoming abortion referendum, we'll be asking the critical question: when does the fetus become a human being? Independence for Change Claire Daly and Save the Eight's Niamh Bhriain go head-to-head in our studio.
Also, tensions mount in Gaza as Palestinians begin to bury their 60 dead. Israel says it was defending its borders. Critics call it a license to kill.
Hello there, and you're very welcome to the programme. Well, first up tonight, we continue our coverage in the run-up to the abortion referendum that's taking place Friday week. A fundamental question, and one of the fundamental differences between the yes and no sides is: when does the fetus get the right to life? Those advocating repeal believe that the fetus only acquires that right at a certain point, and those rights are conditional on the health of the mother. While those on the Remain side believe that the right to life extends right back to conception. In a moment, this is what we'll be debating with Claire Daly and Niamh Bhriain. First, though, this report from Ethna O'Brien.
The forthcoming referendum raises profound issues of life and death, right and wrong, human relationships and the nature of society. But at its heart is one key question: when does a fetus become a human being? It's a question that people have grappled with for centuries, but as science has moved from manuscript to microscope, we now know more about the fetus in the womb than ever before. For some people, the key moment after which human life must be protected comes at conception. When the embryo is about 5 days old, it is implanted in the womb. At that stage, it's the size of a poppy seed. Dr. Sam Coulter-Smith, until recently Master of the Rotunda Hospital, has spent his entire career looking after mothers and their pregnancies.
Implantation occurs at about 3 weeks after the woman's last menstrual period. The pregnancy is a clump of small cells. It implants into the wall of the womb, and then at that point then you start to get fetal development, so division of more cells.
The first crucial point in the development of the fetus is around the 6 to 7 week mark, when the beat of the emerging heart is detected.
At that point, your baby's growing, getting a little bit bigger. Around 7 to 8 weeks, the baby will be about 1.5 centimetres, just more than 1.5 centimetres in size, so just over half an inch.
Yeah, about the end of week
Professor
6.
Paula Murphy is a developmental biologist specialising in embryonic and fetal development.
This is toward the end of week 6, and this is the stage at which the tube heart, a simple linear tube, starts to spontaneously contract to push the forming blood cells around the tissues as they expand. It's very different to an adult heartbeat because it has no nervous system input. It's not joined up with a system. It is simply a tube that contracts. It is very important that that happens for future development, but it's not equivalent to an adult heart with all of the connections to the nervous system and to the rest of the body. That tube then, over time, transforms into this more complex heart that's a lot more sophisticated.
Posters around the country have suggested that 9-week-old fetuses can yawn and kick. We asked our developmental biologist and our obstetrician whether this is the case.
On ultrasound, you can see babies moving, you can see the mouth opening and closing. So yeah, I mean, those things are certainly they're real, and you can see them, absolutely. But the mother obviously can't feed anything at that point.
What is actually happening at 9 weeks? Can a fetus yawn and kick?
I wouldn't use those words. There's spontaneous movement, and it's the very beginning of spontaneous movement. And this is actually something we work on in my research group, why movement is important at that time. So some cells are starting to form into very immature muscle, and that starts to be connected up with the very first nerve input from the spinal cord. And so there are spontaneous contractions of those muscles. First movements are very jerky. Even those coordinated movements are not conscious movements that are linked to any sort of brain function.
The current proposal in the referendum would allow abortion in all circumstances up to 12 weeks gestation. So what is happening with the fetus at that stage?
It looks like a tiny baby at that stage. At 12 weeks, the baby will be about 6.5 centimetres in length. So there's a very significant growth of baby at that point. But I think it's important to stress that the development of the baby is a continuum. There's no particular vital stage that someone hits. It is a continuum of growth and development right through the whole of pregnancy and then into the early stages of childhood.
It's a very recognisable body structure, as you say, and so all the bits are in the right place, but those bits are very immature. So we talked about the heart. The heart has started to beat before that as a linear tube. It's now folding at 12 weeks into a more complex structure with chambers in it. The nervous system starts much earlier than 12 weeks, or the rudiment of it, what will form the nervous system. And so there's a tissue there in which neurons are starting to form. So there are many millions of neurons that have to be born and a lot of connections to be made before it's a fully functioning nervous system.
While scientists and doctors agree that 12 weeks is an arbitrary point in the continuing development of the fetus, I went to UCD to see if philosophers believe that the 12-week point has any significance.
If we do end up legislating to permit termination of pregnancy up to 12 weeks, it doesn't imply that we think that some magic happens at the 12-week point, according to which something that wasn't a full person becomes a full person. I think we should really see it as a continuous process of development. And what we're trying to do is trying to make a decision legally speaking, that actually has the best consequences for the most number of people.
An important question for many people when they think of the fetus and the possibility of termination is whether it can feel pain and when this might happen. Research on the issue has centred around the development of the brain and the nervous system.
I don't know if anybody can answer the question about response to pain. Certainly the baby's brain development is at a very early stage. In the first trimester and the second trimester, whether they feel pain or not, I think is an impossible question to answer.
But scientists have studied this. A report from the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2005 concluded that evidence regarding the capacity for fetal pain is limited, but indicates that fetal perception of pain is unlikely before the third trimester. That's 27 to 28 weeks from conception.
Up to 24 weeks, it's not possible for any awareness or pain sensation, even though the nervous system is being constructed. Some people point to reflex responses in the fetus before that. So a fetus will respond to touch, but this is a spontaneous reflex that's controlled through the spinal cord, not through the front of the brain where awareness would be recorded.
According to the proposed bill to regulate the termination of pregnancy, it shall be lawful to carry out a termination of pregnancy where two medical practitioners certify in their medical opinion there is a risk to the life or serious harm to the health of the pregnant woman where the fetus has not reached viability. 24 weeks is seen by most experts as the stage of pregnancy where viability is reached, but there are a number of considerations.
24 weeks is when we consider babies to be viable. We like them to have reached around 500 grams. Also the maturity of the lungs, and babies born before 24 weeks, their lung development is so poor that when it comes to breathing and oxygenation, they're just not able to do it. So that's why the survival is so poor. But 24 weeks and 500 grams is about the limit. Some babies born less than 24 weeks can survive.
And delivery at 24 weeks can mean long-term developmental and physical problems for a baby.
The baby's development is nowhere near complete at that point. All of the baby's organs are very immature at that stage. The baby's very small, doesn't have very much fat, controlling its temperature, controlling its respiratory system. Baby's neurological system is very immature at that point. So they run into all sorts of issues, everything from sort of mild developmental and learning issues to much more significant things such as cerebral palsy.
Scientific facts are helpful when making crucial life-changing decisions, but in the end it comes down to an individual ethical decision.
Everyone can agree that there's a continuous physical process that takes you from conception to birth. But I think the key thing is that none of those physical facts, none of those medical facts can actually settle the question of when we have a person in the ethical sense of a being who deserves the full moral consideration that we would give to an adult or a child.
That report was from Ethna O'Brien. Niamh, we saw there in Ethna's film that the 5-day-old embryo implants in the womb, and it's the size of a poppy seed. Doesn't have a heartbeat, a brain. I suppose any of the features we associate with being human. Many people would ask how that cluster of cells could possibly be seen as a human being with a constitutional right to life.
Well, I think what's very evident from the VTR, and it was just beautiful to see that, to see the baby kicking and moving, see the little hands and feet, the little face, the nose, the eyes and ears. I think everybody's very familiar with that now. You know, nowadays when you get pregnant, it's shared on Facebook and everyone's looking at your scan, your 9 or 10 or 12-week-old baby. I think it's very evident to everyone that the unborn baby is a human being. And
I would, let me give now, I'm asking about the 5-day-old embryo. We will jump, we will get to the 12 weeks.
Sure.
But at that early stage, we heard it's the size of a poppy seed.
Yeah, well again, I suppose that's the question then, when does life begin? And you know, really science and medicine are united on this. They're unanimous. If you look at Langman's embryology, something that every medical student studies, they all come to or any of the medical textbooks, they all come to the same conclusion, that life begins at conception. Actually, Peter Boylan, who's campaigning for a yes in this referendum, said on the Late Late Show that life began at conception. So just as your VTR pointed out, really, life is a continuum after that. You know, the unborn child at 5 days, at 15 days, at 12 weeks, at 6 months, at 9 months, is the same person.
But we're talking here about, I suppose, when it becomes a human being, when it's a fetus, when it becomes a human being. Do you make no distinction between a 5-day embryo and a 24-week-old
Well,
fetus?
here's why I don't, because when do we become a human being? Like, you were once an embryo, Miriam, so was Claire, so was I. We were all once a fetus in the womb. We were all once, it just means little one. And we were all that little person struggling to come into the world, fighting for our right to life. And we were all protected by the 8th Amendment. And I think that that is something that is at the heart of this debate. We are only debating the right to life of unborn children because they are too tiny and defenceless to speak for themselves.
One more question.
And I think that...
But you are equating, I suppose, the rights of the 5-day-old embryo with the rights of a mother.
Well, if you just let me finish the point, what I am saying is that we were all once that embryo and we were all deserving of protection. And without that protection, what we are saying is that the strong can punish and can kill the weak and defenceless. And I don't think that's a good reflection of what our society should be.
But should that 5-day embryo have equal rights, for instance, to the right to life of a mother?
But I don't think their right to life comes into conflict. And that's a key point in this referendum. You know, abortion campaigners kind of pit women against unborn children. But in reality, that's not the case. Our laws should protect both of them, and it can protect both of them.
Claire Daly, first of all, react to that point there.
Well, I mean, it's a hard one to react. I mean, I think this issue really is, look, unborn life obviously has a value. Nobody is saying that it doesn't have a value. But the issue at stake here is that value equivalent to the life of a fully born woman who maybe has other children, who has other problems going on in her life, and who decides? What your video didn't show is that that embryonic life is attached to a woman, and that the woman's life and all of her objectives and desires, if you like, are intrinsically tied up with that unborn life. So when we're sorry, Niamh, I didn't interrupt you. Yeah. So when we're saying the balance has been wrong by the 8th Amendment, because I suppose what we call prenatal life has a value, but it's not the same.
Okay, but Claire, let me ask you a few questions. I did ask Niamh a few questions, just to be fair. So we saw in Ethna's film there at 12 weeks with the scans. They're extraordinary these days. It does have arms and legs. It's like a tiny human being. It does have a heartbeat. If it has the essential features of a human being, surely it is a human being.
But I think she explained very, very clearly that it doesn't have the senses of a fully fledged human. It can't survive without its mother. It cannot survive. But
newborn babies can't survive without their mothers either. We need to look after them.
They are viable, independent lives. So the issue is somewhat abstracted, if you like, because it cannot be separated from the woman who is carrying it. And what's your alternative? If I can finish the point, so if we look at an embryo or a fetus separate to the woman who's carrying it. And we recognise in many very real instances where a woman faces catastrophic difficulties with her health, with her life, maybe with her finances. She could be in an abusive relationship and she feels she cannot continue with that pregnancy. If you're saying that her rights are equal to a fetus that's incapable of surviving without her, what do you do for her? Do you say that she's forced to continue with that pregnancy?
Okay, just before I bring Niamh in, when then, Claire Daly, is the precise moment you believe the fetus becomes a human being with the right to life of its own?
Well, I suppose international human rights law would recognise that upon birth, the law kicks in on birth, but it's not up to me.
40
No,
weeks.
but let's look. It's not up to me to decide. There is no agreement.
You're a legislator.
There is no agreement in society or amongst the people out there. Niamh, please let me finish the point.
I told I was going to come in now. So
The
can I just say,
170
Let Niamh come back in.
Can I just say, I think it is extraordinary to hear anybody, let alone a legislator, say that the baby does not have a right until they are born. I think that is deeply shocking for most Irish people who are listening to that. And I think most Irish people would also be deeply shocked if they realised that in this bill that Simon Harris has put forward, Head 4 allows for abortion right up to viability, allows the baby to be killed right up to viability. I think that is deeply and profoundly shocking. And let me say this. It is wrong to try to pit women against their babies. What the law should do is to protect both of them. And I think it's very strange, Claire, that as a socialist you are coming in here to defend Fine Gael's bill, which says to women that if they're in an economic crisis, we won't help you. We won't give you the support you need.
I'm going to
we'll
let
only
Claire
give
back
you an
in,
abortion.
but I want you talking.
That's not a good
Niamh,
solution.
you're talking there about balancing rights. So let's say we take the 12-week-old fetus, and we've all seen scans of our own babies' arms and legs, very emotional. But you do have to balance rights here. So how do you balance that right with the right of a 14-year-old girl who's raped, who's distraught at being raped, Niamh, and wants to terminate? How do you balance that right with the right of the 12-week-old fetus?
Absolutely, and they are difficult cases, and I know people who have been in those very difficult cases, and I know one person in particular who was brought by the state for an abortion when she was 13, and who now says that abortion caused her more damage than the rape.
But say it's a 14-year-old who wants to terminate.
You asked me to discuss the case, Miriam, so I'm doing that. But let me say this, this bill is not about that. This bill is about this bill, but this bill is about legalising abortion for any reason at all. Until the 12th week of that baby's life, and then it's about legalising abortion on very broad grounds until 6 months, until the 6th month of pregnancy.
The point is that there are many different reasons, and each of those reasons is unique to the position of the woman who finds herself in that situation. And many of us, and many women out there, it's a normal part of pregnancy that people miscarry in early pregnancy. And what they discharge from that miscarriage is really like a heavy period. It doesn't look anything like a human being. It can't react like a human being. Much of its instincts are reflexes. It doesn't have a heart. Let me finish the point.
No, because you're being really insulting to women out there who listen to
with fully born women who have the law that is being proposed protects and recognises the interests of fetal life by recognising that as the fetus develops, it's
Can I just say that, Claire, you have shown extraordinary insensitivity to women who suffer miscarriages, many of whom are extremely traumatised and upset about the loss of their baby, not their fetus, but their baby. And I think we need to understand that mothers and babies can and should be protected. And what this bill seeks to do is to legalise the killing of unborn children for any reason at all up to 12 weeks, up to 6 months then on very broad grounds. We can do better than that.
I want to agree with Niamh, so maybe that'll help you.
I think in this day and age, abortion is the barbaric and medieval answer to the crisis that women face. We should do better than that and vote no on May 2020.
You're absolutely right that many women who experience miscarriage suffer it as the equivalent of a bereavement. Maybe somebody gets pregnant late in life and that was their last chance to have a baby, and they are utterly bereaved by that. But the point that you've touched on, which you miss in this whole campaign, is that value is linked to its mother's aspirations and the woman's aspirations in this situation. And the people making the decisions about their own body are the women themselves. And the only way in which we can balance it is allow women make the decisions.
I think it's very evident that you just don't have any regard for the right to life of the child at all. And I believe that we can protect both mother and baby, that we should do our very best for both mother and baby. I think abortion is a cop-out. It's a symptom that we have failed women. And I think that what this government is doing is telling Irish women, you know what, if you've got a crisis in pregnancy, you are on your own. Instead of helping you, we'll simply offer you an abortion. I don't think that's good enough.
But you're protecting nobody. Every day women are faced with crisis pregnancies, and every day Irish women are deciding to terminate their pregnancies, as are many of them deciding to keep their babies. Repealing the 8th Amendment won't change that. It's the only way in which those who...
Thank you both very much. I'm going to leave it there tonight.
It's the only way you can respect all opinions, to be honest.
Niamh, Bhriain, thank you both very much for coming in tonight. David.